I'd like to explain a little bit more about social credit. The way we view things this election is that you've got two choices when you vote. You can either vote for social credit or you can vote for any of the other parties. What you're voting for is basically, with any of the other parties, for $5 billion every year of your tax money being pulled out of the economy to give to investors. So what that means is that the needed government funding that it borrows from private commercial banks obviously have to have interest paid on it. And that's paid out of our tax money and given back to them. And that's not necessary. It's not necessary at all. So any good business person would realise when they go and get a loan that they want to get the best terms possible. They want to get the lowest interest rate and they want to get the best terms. Any financial advisor will tell you that. I'm sure you look for that when you look for a mortgage, that our government is not doing that. So our government at the moment owns its own bank. It's called the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, but it's not using it for much needed government funding. We don't know why. I don't know if it's an aberration of a historical aberration or whether it's just a status quo, but they're not using it. If they did use our own bank, we can have a perpetual zero coupon bond, but to put that in English, it just means we don't need to pay interest. We don't need to pay any interest on needed government spending. New Zealand's a sovereign nation and the government reigns supreme. We do not need to borrow needed government funding from private commercial banks. That's about the most neoliberal thing we could be doing. But it's just because it's sort of entrenched as the status quo that we keep doing that. So the $5 billion a year that we're paying at the moment, that comes out of the real economy and that comes out of the productive economy when it could be spent on things we dearly need. And we all know the things we dearly need at the moment. We need better infrastructure. We need funding for schools and hospitals. And at the moment, that's just money that can't go into those things. So this sort of funding for needed government spending has been done before. 7, 8 minutes.
No, it's not.
Okay. Has been done before in the 1930s. The first Labour government built 30,000 state houses during the Depression using money from the Reserve Bank of New Zealand. So it actually has been done before. We didn't get any inflation. We provided jobs and we provided employment, but we also provided houses. So what Jacinda would call this is double duty. We do one thing and we get something good, but we get something else good as well. But the thing is, with the double duty at the moment, your taxes are paying for it. Not only in interest to pay the investors, but we've got to pay the capital back as well, remember. Now at the moment, we're going to have a debt bomb of $200 billion in a few years. That is why social credit's message is so important now, because that is a huge debt and it's going to put New Zealand in a really precarious situation. We're going to be paying that off by austerity measures, by our grandchildren for many, many, many decades to come. It's really important we understand the implications of this. We have a choice. We can use our own bank or we can borrow off private commercial banks. It's that simple. Now, we're not the only people doing this or saying this. These countries are doing this at the moment. Japan is using their own central bank, which they own, and they've got the third strongest economy in the world without inflation problems. China's doing it. You might notice they're buying up the world at the moment. Canada's done it before, Australia's done it before, and as I've just explained, New Zealand's done it before. We are entering a huge recession, one of the largest in 160 years. And it's time to do it again, because if we don't, we're going to be in trouble. And that's why I say there's two choices. Vote for the only party that's actually offering this, or vote for one of the other options, and you'll have to choose. You'll have to choose between climate change, or infrastructure, or child poverty, or paying off debt. You know, they want to do all these things at the same time as potentially reducing taxes. We just can't have everything, but we can have a lot more if we're using our own money as a sovereign nation. A lot of New Zealand economists are also endorsing this idea. We have Professor Jeff Bertram, Shamibul Jacob, Ralph Manji, And there's international economists too, Professor Steve Keen, even International Monetary Fund economists such as Michael Kumoff. And by the way, these places are all recognise that money is always created out of thin air, and just in case anybody's got any questions about that, I actually printed five copies of a paper from the Bank of England that's over there on the table, just if you want to have a look at how money is actually created. So, that's 2 minutes left, thank you. Right, I just want to explain that the situation gets worse because the New Zealand government, the Reserve Bank is actually printing money, but what it's doing is buying bonds back on the secondary market. So that means rather than creating money to give to our economy and boost our economy and for the things that the people need, it's giving it to the private investors to buy bonds back. Now, ex-National Prime Minister Jim Bolger had a thing or two to say about that. He said that the government is going to owe itself $100 billion, and that's what it's going to do. The government will owe itself $100 billion, but is not planning to write it off. And he said billions of dollars here in New Zealand are just created by the Reserve Bank. We have a choice whether we follow traditional economics and pay that back over the next 20 years by austerity politics, or we actually say we owe it to nobody, we created it, the Reserve Bank created it, and we write most of it off. Now, social credit would of course agree with that, but we don't endorse actually buying back government bonds on the secondary market in the first place. However, given that we owe ourselves money, we don't understand why we cannot write that off as a sovereign nation. And so that was from Jim Bolger on the Radio New Zealand morning report. Now, Grant Robertson's reason for not doing all of these things is he doesn't want to blur monetary and fiscal boundaries, or he says we just don't do it that way. But I want to point out that they're our representatives, and they should be doing what's in our best interests of the people, not pandering to the private banks to make sure that they make more money, or whatever his reason, I don't know. It's 10 minutes. So,
let's finish.
ladies and gentlemen, please vote social credit in 2020.